Good morning. We're our Vav Medala 46a at the bottom. We're going to dedicate today's learning for the the complete and speedy and smooth recovery of a young soldier in the IDF, Nadav Chaim Ben Irit Chaya, who should come out of his predicament smoothly, happily, return home to his family in great joy.
Amen.
With complete health, great joy and health. Okay, so we are Memvav Medala 46a at the bottom. If we count up from the bottom, we are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. In the middle of the page, it is the Aleph Reish, which stands for Omar Reb, Rabbi, or Omar Reb. So we're moving all the way through the process of the Eglah Rufa, and we spent quite a bit of time on each stage. And the judges who are to come from Jerusalem, the process of measuring, where the body is found, how the body is found, and so on. We talked about the nature of the calf that's to be brought. And now we're going to transition into where it's to be brought. That is near a river, in a place that was never worked. And then the process of the actual decapitation. So the lines that are about to be read now is a kind of transition into that conversation. And it very much ties in, almost uncannily explicit, to the Hasidic explanation that we learned at the beginning of this whole process. So let's read. Omar Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul. Rabbi Yochanan, son of Shaul, related. This is a kind of drush passage in the Gemara. Drush in the sense that, right, we have the 4 layers of Torah understanding. We have the pshat, the remez, the drush, and the side. Right, the pshat being the basic translation, basic meaning, which you can kind of put halacha on that level. And that just, what is the Torah saying on its most literal earthly form? And then you have the remez, things that are alluded to. And then the drush, extrapolative interpretation, if you will. So this is one such line, which reads, Ma Amra Torah. Why is it that Torah says, Hevi Egla v'nachal, bring a calf to the river? Why does the Torah say to do that? Says Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul, Amar HaKadosh Baruch, God is telling us, Yavoi davar shalai asa peres, let something that never produced fruit come. This egla that never did any work, so never produced anything. The yerov, and let it be decapitated. The makam, in a place she'ein asa peres, that doesn't bear fruit. At the river, which has never worked. The yechaper, and this will atone al mi, for someone shaloi hanichu, who has not let lases peres to make fruit. End quote from Yochanan son of Shaul. It's all no production. The calf never produced anything, decapitated at a place that never produced anything, to atone for one who was taken early and thus never been able to produce anything, wasn't allowed to produce fruit.
Fruit?
That's the translation literally, fruit. It's kind of poetic. The calf never bear fruit, and a place that never bear fruit, atone for someone who's not let to bear fruit. Okay. So Gemara asks, my peres, what do you mean by fruit? That this person wasn't allowed to produce. For the calf, it's quite clear. Never did any work, so never produced any fruit, or more broadly speaking, never produced any produce. But literally the word is fruit. That's simple. On a space that never produced fruit, also quite literally, nothing ever grew there. So what does it mean that this person that that's being atoned for, is being atoned for one it's being atoned for the fact that we didn't allow one to produce fruit. what fruit are we not allowing him to produce? Well, ilema, should you suggest that this is a reference to literally having children, which is referred to as fruit. Be fruitful and multiply. That's the wording in the verse telling us, commanding us to have children. So is Rabbi Yochanan, son of Shaul, suggesting that we're atoning for the fact that this person wasn't allowed to have children? Elamayata. If that is the case, then we would conclude azaken, an elder person, vasadis, and someone who, by God's design, can't have children. Hachanami, are you suggesting that here too, deloy arfinon, that he shouldn't be a no decapitation? Right? Because if the implication is that we're bringing something that doesn't produce fruit in order to atone for one who has not been allowed to have fruit, and fruit here means children, that would imply that this person could have had children and now can't because he's been killed. So if someone who can't have children just because of his circumstances in life, this person doesn't get the atonement, doesn't get the Egla Rufa. Certainly that's not the case.
Well, we don't know if he had children or not.
And we don't even know. But let's say you did know. Okay, so if it's a young person, okay, let's just say I don't know. Let's say we did know, right? Your point is taken, but the Gemara is taking that same point you're making to its extreme.
Right.
If the idea is to atone for someone who's not been allowed to make fruit, and fruit means children, then what if we know the person can't make children anymore? So no Egla Rufa for him? Well, he couldn't have anyway. He's too old. I don't know, whatever. Even if he had children, even if he had children, but we're saying he hasn't been let to bear fruit. He can't have fruit anyway, if fruit means children. Ella, rather, fruit means mitzvahs. Now that he's been killed, he's not been let to do more mitzvahs, which anybody can do at any age, irrespective of circumstance. And therefore, you understand? Sorry? So here is the proof for this idea that mitzvahs are a person's fruit. This Gemara. And it's relevant. I've seen it a few times when, like, in Pirkei Avos, it talks about, like, trees that, like, a person's like a tree that doesn't bear fruit if his learning is incorrect. And here's a citation that fruit here means performed mitzvahs, as opposed to what the Gemara could have said, learning, let's say. Right?
Very broad.
Well, learning is also a good thing, and it's been taken away from him now that he can't learn Torah. Yeah, learn Torah, I mean specifically, yeah. It's been taken away from him. He's been robbed of that opportunity now that he's been killed, just as he's been robbed of the opportunity to do mitzvahs. But here we refer to fruit as mitzvahs. And it follows, because fruit is kind of like an offspring that lives on in the world, detached from the source, right? And that's what mitzvahs are. They live on in the world outside of the person. It's an action that's done in the world. A pair of leather that's made into tefillin is now holy forever, right? Irrespective of whether the person's around anymore. Likewise, any object with which a mitzvah was done, there's an added level of holiness to that object. You've invited God into that world. You made a home for God in that space, to use that language, whether the person's here or not. So that's the fruit idea. There's also the fact that everybody can do mitzvahs. Not everybody can learn Torah at the same level, right? In fact, even in Jewish law, depending on the person's circumstances, his level of education, his occupation, and therefore the time he has in life, his obligations and so on, his obligations to life, his family, to whatever else it is, his obligation to learn Torah changes. It's the only mitzvah like that. With every other mitzvah, there's an equality. Everybody has to put on tefillin. It's not as if one person is obligated to put on more tefillin than another. Certainly one can do the mitzvah of tefillin with more nuance and with more detail, and the same thing with Shabbos and so on. But those nuance and details, not as if like, oh, this class of people is obligated in these extra nuances, and this class of people is not obligated in those nuances. Everybody's obligated in the mitzvah equally. Everybody can choose at what degree they want to perform that mitzvah. But the like the code of Jewish law, when it comes to the performance of mitzvahs, is written equally for everybody. Right? There is class differences. Let's say certain mitzvahs which don't apply which only apply to Kohanim. But it's not subject to your advancement. It's subject to like your birth. Like, are you born a king or you're not born a king? Are you born a Kohen, not born a Kohen? You're born a male or a female? That would change which mitzvahs apply to you. But there's an equal standard across the group, so to speak. Yeah. But
I'm saying even in that class, though, the people who are not Kohanim need to know the rules of Kohanim because make sure they don't step within the bounds of the prohibitions of Kohanim.
That's also true.
Right?
Make sure you're not eating truma. Yeah, that's also a good point.
I have to know that.
That's a good point. Yeah. There's also the fact that everybody's obligated to know all mitzvahs.
Right.
That's the point. But when it comes to Torah, your obligation is subject to your preference and circumstance, not just of birth, but of education, your financial circumstance, your occupational circumstance, your career circumstance, and so on. Your mitzvah changes. Two people learning the same passage, and one person fulfilled his obligation to learn Torah, and the other person didn't. Two people putting on the same pair of tefillin, they both fulfilled their obligation, even if they didn't do all the nuances, right? And maybe that would explain why the Gemara here says mitzvahs, because we're trying to find fruit that's equal across the board, no matter who this person is that's found murdered. He was robbed of producing fruit that he could have done, which is mitzvahs, equal across the board. Everybody has them. Everybody could do them. Right? Not only can everybody do them, but everybody does do them. Right? As the famous Gemara goes, that even the most empty of them, of the Jewish people, are filled with mitzvahs, like the pomegranate is filled with seeds. Right? So not only does everybody able to do mitzvahs, everybody does, declares the Gemara. And this person's robbed of that. So there's an equality across the board of no matter who's being killed.
Seems like it's almost like a sensitivity to the deceased, that the Egla Rufa and the land is not worked, so not to show it in its face that the spirit of this soul that
it's been robbed of that opportunity.
He's robbed, so therefore we shouldn't put it in his face.
Oh, you can't produce, but look, we have something else that's producing.
Right. So don't let them.
That's very good, which ties into what we were learning about the Chassidus, which is what I wanted to share. Yeah. It's almost like the Gemara is saying explicitly that the antithesis of the fact that the person has been robbed of mitzvahs is to offer something or to have a ritual related to the lack of production.
Right.
Which almost could be counterintuitive. If we're trying to make up for lost, right, then shouldn't we increase?
Yeah, that would.
Right. So this person has been robbed of the opportunity to produce. So now let's do more production.
Right. That would be the.
That's what you would imagine.
Yeah.
Right. Which is what that's right. Which is what karbanos are. Misappropriated energy, redirected energy to the altar to make up for it. Right. But as we're learned in Chassidus, here the offerings the other way around, to acknowledge the existence of evil, push it into its corner. So if that's the case, we don't want anything that produces anything.
Right.
So that's correct. That's right. So what we're saying is there's an area of life that's been robbed of doing mitzvahs because there is this area called klipa, which takes and doesn't produce. So here you are, stuff in your corner, you take and don't produce, but that's not us. So it kind of follows in that way. Right? The equation of the production of or the lack of the robbed opportunity production of the person, which is mitzvahs, equating to the fact that this animal in this place is not producing. In other words, the kedusha is the lost kedusha is the production of mitzvahs, and the klipa is the lack of production, because it's on the receiving end rather than the giving end. As we learned in Chassidus, all kedusha produces, gives, and all klipa is self-centered and taking.
It's almost like the opposite of bringing the korban, like the other end.
That's correct. That was the point. That's correct. That's right. Another interesting thing here is the very fact that the Gemara entertains the idea that fruit here means children, and then concludes that it means mitzvahs, is in and of itself an indication that there's an equality between the two. There's a comparability to the two. The fact that the Gemara entertains these two possibilities as the translation of the same word indicates that there's a relationship between the two, between children and mitzvahs.
Part of the whole.
That's right. In that,
includes,
sorry?
Children includes.
Right, but the fact of having children itself is equal to the mitzvahs. In the sense, that's correct. Because they're both being interchanged as translations to the same word. Right?
The connection.
That's right, indicating that one's offspring is their mitzvahs. Right? Where do we have this? We have this in the commentary to Noach. Eila told us Noach, these are the offspring of Noach, or these are the chronicles of Noach. Noach, each tzaddik, Noach was a righteous man. The Torah in his generation, and it goes on right to describe Noach's good behavior. It doesn't describe his offspring, which is how it introduced. Eila told us, these are the offspring. Right? Usually when it says Eila told us, these are the offspring, the Torah goes on to say who the children are. You know, when it comes to Yaakov, when it comes to Yitzchak, Rashi comments and says, Yaakov Esav Amorim B'Parsha, that the offspring are a reference to Yaakov and Esav, which are his children. When it comes to Noach, do you mind getting a chumash? I think it's even Rashi here, please, if you don't mind. I think it's even in Rashi. Bereshis. Thank you very much. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, it's in Rashi. So the Torah says these are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous person in his generation. Noach was righteous and wholesome in his generation. So Rashi gives two commentaries. One is that the first interpretation, as Rashi says it is, the Torah says these are the offspring of Noach. But having mentioned Noach's name, it's going to mention his praises. And then the next verse, verse 10, goes on to describe Noach's children. So it does go on to say the offspring. Right? That's the first interpretation of Rashi. And the second interpretation of Rashi is, to teach you, the primary offspring of the righteous are Maisim Tovim, their good deeds. And then goes on to say his physical progeny, his actual children. And that follows our Gemara here. That the Gemara equates having children and mitzvahs as equal possible translations of the same word, fruit. Because again, it's the same point. Fruit is the mark you leave on the world outside of yourself. Right? We can chop a tree down, but the fruit is still here. Right? So the holiness a person brings into this world via mitzvahs.
And those fruits can bear trees because they have seeds.
It's correct. It's correct. And the same thing is true of a person's mitzvahs. And in some ways, even more than his Torah. As Rashi puts it here, it's Maisim Tovim, good deeds. Not even using the word mitzvahs, Maisim Tovim. Right? And actually, Chassidus translate the word Maisim Tovim as Maisim, deeds, being Torah deeds, that is mitzvahs. But Tovim, meaning you've added a good element to the mitzvahs. You put an intentionality into it. You put an enthusiasm into it. So you turned your actions into Tovim, into good ones. The point being that in the same way, children physically carry on who the person is, his mitzvahs does the same thing. His mitzvahs are the exact same thing. The mitzvahs a person does in the physical world and the impact he leaves in the physical world with physically doing mitzvahs is everlasting.
But only if the children are taught to learn Torah.
Then you have the combination of both the spiritual and the physical. So then they're physically keeping on your gene, just biologically, but spiritually, yeah, it's a mitzvah to have children. Actually, there's a famous, it's actually a rather important conversation for nowadays, especially since there's this whole new mode of people who opt out of having children, which is almost bizarrely popular nowadays. But
I'm thinking of contemporary times because of assimilation.
Yeah. So there's a conversation that the Gemara elucidates between, I want to say it's King Chizkiyahu, maybe Tzidkiyahu. It's one of the kings towards the end of this First Temple period who has a conversation with a prophet. The verse describes the verse alludes to a conversation that concludes in his prayer, the king's prayer. I don't remember the details, but the Gemara elucidates the conversation in that the king understood that his offspring are going to rebel against God and thus refrain from having children. And he's reprimanded by the prophet and said, you don't get to play that. You don't get to play God and decide how your children are going to be and therefore make a choice not to have them. You have your obligation to have children. and you fulfill that obligation. And what happens later, that it's either up to your education, what level of education you're going to give, your children's choices, and God's plan for the world. But you have to play your part, and your part is to have children, even if you think it's going to be negative in the long run, which that's what I was saying. It's relevant to this new strange mode where like, oh, the world is a painful place. Why should I have children? That's not on you. Your job is to make the world a little bit better than you found it, and have children and educate them to hopefully do the same. And if they're incapable of doing the same, irrelevant. You still have your obligation to have children. If I can get a little personal and somewhat vulnerable here, I hesitating to share this, but I think it's valuable nonetheless. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, it's just not a secret. He suffered from whatever mental challenges he suffered from, and he made a choice that left us all bereaving his loss about 18 months ago. So I never had this conversation explicitly with my in-laws, but this definitely was talked about. They don't, God forbid, regret having having children, including having him, even though there's huge amounts of grief in the loss of their child. Do they regret, God forbid, having him? Not even a question. They don't. They fulfill their obligation as Hashem wanted, to bring children and to raise them to the best of their ability. And for Hashem's decision that he has to struggle with certain things and it leads to a certain conclusion, then that's the way Hashem wanted it. But they play their role. I don't doubt for a second that they have no regret. I'm sure they have many regrets, but not having children is not one of them. That's not even a question. How do we get to this? Oh, because you're talking about whether the children fall in the ways of Torah, right? So there's the having mitzvah, having children itself, which itself is a mitzvah, and physically you're doing what you're supposed to. And then there's step 2 to see if that can also continue spiritually as well. And perhaps what the Gemara is doing here by equating the performance of mitzvahs and having children is indicating that the spiritual progeny is just as valuable as the material progeny, perhaps even more so. And therefore, the tragedy in a person who's been killed in this case and been robbed of the opportunity to perform mitzvahs and thus require this whole ritual of atonement. Where's my phone? Sorry. Okay.
Like when you go to
Sorry?
It's like when you go to a cemetery, you shouldn't have your tzitzits out, right?
Not to embarrass those who passed, yeah.
Right. So you're flaunting the fact that you're still able to do mitzvah.
That's the point you were making, that you don't want to like flaunt production in front of people.
Yeah, that's where I got it from.
Yeah. That idea, yeah. There's another thing about having children, which is the Gemara says that Ein ben David ba achi kalia kol neshama shebeguf. I think I'm quoting it correctly. But the content is that Mashiach comes when all of the souls that are in the body come down. Meaning, as Rashi explains it there, the treasury, the reservoir, the source of souls in the spiritual realms are referred to as a body, a spiritual body, in the sense that all Jews are really one spiritual large body. And their soul, Jewish souls are really a part of one singular unit. And the Gemara there says that Mashiach comes when all of the parts, all the souls of that unit come down to this world. So even the fact that Neshama comes down to this world is in itself a valuable step toward the coming of Mashiach. Just the very fact that the soul comes down to this world. And I read on the subject, I read a booklet written by, I think it's Rabbi Bogomilsky, if I'm not mistaken. And there he cites a number of sources that indicate that a child in utero has a unique soul. In utero has a unique soul, and therefore, even if God forbid, woman parents suffer a
Miscarriage.
miscarriage, and they never get to appreciate and enjoy on a physical level their offspring, that soul having come down to this world by the very fact that it came into a body, even if the body never made it out of alive, made it out of the mother's womb, still fulfilled the role of bringing the world closer to Mashiach because of this Gemara. So this Gemara, which says that Mashiach comes when all souls come down to this world. So a soul coming down to this world is in and of itself a step toward Mashiach's coming. Even if by God's mysterious design, the soul never gets to notwithstanding all these things are nice, are good comfort, and we look to them for that comfort and solace. But at the same time, we daven every day that we should never need and require such comfort and solace, and we should be able to just see all the blessings revealed, as God knows He can do it, and as we have faith that He can and will. Okay, let's learn a few more lines of Gemara. There's obviously a lot more that could be said, but to unpack all of this, but okay, let's go forward. Last line of the Gemara on Memvav Medalef 46a. The next line of the Mishnah was, they take the calf El Nachal Eson to a river classified as Eson, as per the verse. Says the Mishnah, I'm sorry.
Says it twice, right?
That's right. So, hold on a second. It's taken down to a river classified as Eson, period. Eson, the meaning of the word Eson, Kimashmo, is to be taken as we understand it, which is Kasha. Kasha means literally hard, a hard river, as in it's a strong river, raging. Now here's an ironic Gemara, and we'll read and translate, and we'll open the floor to what you guys think. So that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says commenting on the verse says to take it down to a river that's Eson. Eson Kimashmoy, Eson, as it's plainly understood, means Kasha, a hard river, strong river. So Tanrab Anar, our sages taught, Menayin le'eson shu Kasha. From where do we derive this implication? As the Mishnah just said, without explaining how it concluded this way, it just said, Eson Kamashmoy, the basic understanding of the word Eson is hard or strong. As is often the case, the Gemara introduces other Mishnaic texts which elaborate on that which the Mishnah states. In this case as well, Mishnaic text which reads, Menayin, from where do we know le'eson? That the word Eson, shu Kasha, indicates strong or tough or hard.
What's the direct translation of Eson?
Exactly.
That's it.
That's what we're talking about. It means like ancient and strong. We're going to learn in a second. It means ancient, strong, like fortified.
Okay.
Something like, not fortified, but ancient, strong. But it means actually strong, but strong in the sense that it's always been. It's like constant, like the strong, ancient entity. But first we're going with the translation as strong or kasha, hard, literally hardened. Kasha means literally hard or difficult, tough. Tough is a good word. Yeah. It's a
describe water.
Okay, yeah. So in the case of water, it would be raging very strongly. Yeah. But it literally means kasha or tough or hard. We're going to see.
Like unusual description
of water, which is fluid.
Right.
And you're going to see it's going to get even more unusual. That's why I said it's an ironic Gemara, as we'll see in a moment.
Okay. All right.
So, Shenemar, as the verse reads, top of Memvav Mudbeis 46b. Shenemar, as the verse reads, where am I? Eson Moshevecha. The verse says, Eson is your dwelling. The sim besela kanecha, and place in the stone your acquisition. So the verse compares Eson, like Eson is your dwelling, describing your dwelling as Eson, and then describing your acquisition as being placed in a rock, indicating that Eson is comparable to rock. Mm-hmm. And that's how we know that Eson means tough or hard.
That would make sense.
Which isn't that funny? That the Gemara is using this to tell us how the water is tough
Right.
by just comparing it to a rock, which is immutable, kind of adding to the irony that you're talking about. That's why I said I'm going to open the floor to interpretation. But this is the Gemara literally. The Gemara literally just means that just as a rock is tough, and Asun's being compared to a rock, so Asun therefore means tough. So the water has to be tough water, kasha, hard, tough.
Maybe it's like a very rocky,
Maybe that's what causes
navigable. That's the word.
Yeah, unnavigationable.
Waterway.
Yeah, which maybe means, well, that itself, waters become raging when they hit rocks. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, that's
on a literal level. Yeah, yeah. And another verse that also indicates that Asun is related to the term rock, which means tough or hard. Well, the verse also says, Shimu hardim, listen mountains, Esriv Hashem, the strife of God. Va'isanim, and the Asuns, Moiste Aretz, the foundation of the earth. So it says, listen mountains, to the strife of Hashem, and the ancient ones who are the foundation of the earth. Again, not the ancient ones, the Asun ones. Now
the stony ones.
Exactly. The stony ones who are the foundation of the earth, again, compared to the mountains being primarily made of rock. So again, the word Asun being compared to rock, and therefore tough or hard. So maybe, like you said, it means a rocky river, which makes it then raging, perhaps, on a literal level. Now, others say, and this is where I got the idea that it's ancient, and usually actually it is described as ancient. Others say, from where do we know that the word Asun means old or ancient? Shenemar, as the verse reads, Goy Asunhu, it is a Asun nation. Goy me'olamhu, it's a nation that was forever, or always was. So describing a nation as for always was, and describing it as Asun indicates that Asun means ancient or strong. Okay, so we have Asun as ancient, we have Asun as a rock. Combining those two together means tough, and what's the word?
Kind of like resilient.
Resilient, good, yeah. And thus, in the case of the river, it means raging. Okay, so there's like this whole mix of words that come together.
Also, age meaning like it'll never die out. It's been there since
That's right.
Inception.
That's right.
There's no indication that it's weak and
that's right.
Dry up or
it stood the test of time.
Right.
It's that kind of strength, which is why it's related to a rock, because rock is like
it's timeless.
It's literally, even in English you say that this person's my rock. What do you mean when you say that? I mean the person's always there for me through thick and thin. Right? So there's an ancient element to it as well as a strong element. Resilient is a good word. Unwavering. Which is why Chassidus refers to the essence of the Jewish soul, which is unchanging, as Asun shebeneshama, the Asun of the neshama. There's often this little remez, this little allusion to the opening word of Tanya, which is the word Tanya, even though some of the commentaries in Tanya point out that the text that Tanya goes on to quote is not actually a Mishnaic text, which is introduced with the word Tanya. It's actually a drush. And many of the commentaries of Tanya discuss why Tanya opens up the word Tanya, because it says, we learned in the tractate Nida, and it quotes the Gemara Nida. But the quote from the Gemara Nida is not from a Tanya. It's not from a Mishnaic era. And some of the commentaries in Tanya ask, well, why is it opening up with the word Tanya? It should open up with Darash. It's expounded, not just like Tanya. There's different explanations because it is found in another place in the Mishnaic text, whatever. But one of the explanations is that the word Tanya, Taf, Nun, Yud, Aleph, rearranged, is Asun. Aleph, Yud, Saf, Nun, indicating that the book, opening with the word Tanya, is meant to reveal the Asun, that immutable, resilient, unchanging strength of the neshama. So there has to be a connection in here. There has to be. And maybe in the sense that even as we acknowledge the space of negativity and, decapitate from the backside and the place that's no growth, we're acknowledging the negativity and saying, here's your due, leave us alone. We remember that we have an Asun, we have this great strength that's resilient to all of this stuff. And no matter what we've gone through, the Asun still rages. the Asen and the Shama, the ancient rock, still rages, ironically. The rock still rages. Perhaps. Again, the floor is open to further analysis. Okay, God willing, tomorrow we get to the decapitation, and then we get to the fact that it doesn't have any production, not in the past, not in the future. And then we get to what kind of work is allowed there, right? We discussed it, that work that's on the land is permissible, but not work with the land. We're going to get to all of that, God willing, tomorrow. And then to the next part of the procedure when they wash their hands and so on and so forth. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.
Okay. All right.